Hi and welcome to this video where I got a fail from the MOT. Next minute she's absolutely hysterical. Never seen her laughing so much. Something was really funny. So we'll start with the massive corrosion on the offside sill. So I'd actually just got the needle scaler out on this side just to remove the surface paint, thinking this side was actually okay. But the needle scaler went through, and then the more I held the scaler onto it, the more I found out that this side was an absolute disaster. So as you can see, so this is the rear of the sill, but the front is just as bad. So here I'm measuring up because I realise now there's no way I'm going to do this by utilising an old helium air balloon bottle. We're going to have to get some metal now properly. So I'm taking some measurements down, and thankfully we have got a steel stockholder relatively close by, because obviously I do need some proper lengths of metal now to try and mend this. Okay, so I've got my measurements, so I can now visit a steel stockholder. So in some ways the Ford being in such poor condition was actually a good thing, because it forced me to actually find a proper steel stockholder, because obviously I needed quite a bit of metal and a bit of searching, and I actually found this business which was relatively local to me. So I popped in, saw the gentleman, said, have you got any metal? And I explained to him I was going to try and bend this sill, and he said, you're not going to do that, because this is 1.5 mil thickness. He says we've got a massive brake press there. He says we can use that just to bend it, save you the hassle. So anyway, so he done that, done me 2 pieces, and was actually going to give me the metal. I obviously gave him some money for it, but he was going to give them to me. And because I think I was showing so much interest in his business and the machinery and that, he actually thought, I'll give you a bit of a demonstration of what this machine can do and why we have it here. So he changed the formers over and then cut some metal just to demonstrate, because that brake press you can actually pre-program so that you can make the side of a trailer, which is quite incredible really. So there we go, there's the sheet metal just sliced off. And so now he's running the program, and all he's got to do is feed the metal in, and the program will just control everything. So the depth of the metal is being controlled, and then it obviously says turn the metal over, put it back in, and I think it uses some light beams and stuff to detect the metal is in there correctly, and then it goes through the pressing procedure. So, and there we are. This is how the side of a trailer is pressed into shape. It was really quite a fun day out, it turned out to be. So obviously if the Ford didn't have rusty seals, I wouldn't have got to have seen all this. So in some ways it was a good thing. But anyway, so now on to preparing the metal for the Ford Focus. So there we are, we've got our metal, and this really is a bit of a first for me, because I've always avoided doing major body work on a car. It's one thing having a welder, but to actually start welding sills and stuff is pretty tricky, because the metal's quite thin and you're welding upside down and stuff like that. So, but obviously my hand has been forced with this. I've got absolutely no choice but to try and have a go at it. So I've cut my piece of metal, getting it all ready, and then obviously cutting out all the rot, which is quite considerable. Like I say, for me this was actually quite frightening, because I've never chopped into a car like this before. One of the reasons was because of fire. There's always the fear of fire when welding, and what you do find is there's wax oil inside the sills. I don't know why Ford bother actually, because the sills just rust to pieces anyway, but they actually do some wax oil in there, and that can easily catch fire, so you've got to be very careful with it. So here I'm just drilling the holes now to effectively do the spot welds onto the existing lip under the car. So this is where you'd put your jack and jack it up. So I think that should be okay now. So I'm just going to take off the burrs on the metal and then give it all a bit of a clean down with some brake fluid and try and get as much of that wax oil out so that it doesn't catch fire. So now onto the welding part. Okay, so we'll get our Arga shield on, set the welder to 3 and a wire feed speed of 5, and that seemed to be the sweet spot. It seemed to work okay. So I tried not to overheat things too much and do it in sort of short bursts, but the biggest issue I actually had was the wax oil catching fire, because I was somewhat paranoid about a fire developing in the sill and I couldn't put it out. So I actually sort of modified this so I could actually blow water up into the sill. Probably not great for rust, but I think fire was more of my concern because the welding just wasn't happening because of the fear of fire. But anyway, so we've got this front panel on now. I'm just using a flap disc there to smooth it all back, and then I can go on to the rear one. So like I say, once I'd actually got a pressurised fire extinguisher ready, I was then felt far more confident in actually getting on with welding it, knowing that if there was a fire I could instantly put it out properly. But I sort of stuck with compressed air because that sort of blows it out, but I knew I had a major backup if things went wrong. So there we go, so that's the rear panel now done. And you can see the holes in there actually for the plastic trim that goes on the bottom. But what I did is I just made sure that those holes were big enough for me to get this brass rod up into, so that as a last resort I knew I could flood the inside of the sill with water if things got out of hand. So there we are, so we can just carry on now with the welding. And it all went actually quite well. I was actually quite pleased with the results. Obviously it burnt all the paint off, so I was obviously going to then have to repaint this sill afterwards. But anyway, so the last thing I was going to do was a brake service and do a fluid flush just before the MOT. So here I'm using my trusty old Sealer pressure vessel, and I'll pop some .4 in there because I know the brakes on this car aren't going to be very good. So I've got to get the fluid flush through. It's been sat there in a field effectively for 2 or 3 years. So what I'll do is I'll get that out and obviously service the brakes, because they're not going to be in great condition either. So this is quite a useful tool. It does make the job a lot easier because you just pressurise it and then effectively go round, go to the wheel that's furthest from the master cylinder, bleed that off by perhaps 250 mil, do the same again on the other side, and as you can see there's definitely air coming through. The bleed nipples were all seized solid, so I had to replace the bleed nipples because there was no way of opening them. But now everything's looking quite good, and the brake pedal was quite nice and solid after this, so I think the next job is book it in for an MOT and see what happens. After all we can do is try our best. So I took the car for its MOT, left it with them, came back home, and as you sometimes do, you sit there on your phone refreshing the government website to see if your car's passed or not. And anyway, my stepdaughter was visiting, and so she thought she'd sit there and keep refreshing her phone, you know. And next minute she's absolutely hysterical. Never seen her laughing so much. Something was really funny. And it was the list of things that my car had failed on. Obviously quite a long list. And she mentioned the engine. I thought, well no, the engine, that's the good bit about the car. It shouldn't fail on the engine. So I thought, I don't want to know, don't tell me. I'll just go and pick the car up and see for myself what's wrong. So anyway, so the major defects were rear fog lamp not working. Obviously I should have checked that. So that's not a problem. Windscreen washer provides insufficient washer liquid. I didn't fill the bottle up. Service brake excessively fluctuating offside front. Well, that's probably because it had been laid up and the brakes haven't actually been used for about 3 years. So, and then we get on to the exhaust hydrocarbon content after second fast idle exceeds manufacturer specified limits. And then another carbon monoxide content exceeds limits. And then exhaust lambda reading after second fast idle outside limits. So I'm thinking, well, what do I do about that? That's the cat, the sensors. So this starts to get a bit more expensive. So I spoke to the garage and they said basically the car had no fuel in it and you were running it on fumes. It might help if you actually put fuel in the car. So what I did was I came back, fueled the car up, ran it till it was really hot. I ran that engine, got it really warmed up, got the cat hot, got the sensors hot, got all that hot, drove backwards and forwards in my yard to get the brakes sort of really going, bedding in and everything else. Obviously mended the bulb and all that lot, and filled up the washer bottle, and I got a pass. Happy days. So basically the car is okay. There is obviously surface corrosion. It does mention a lot about surface corrosion, things like that. And as for the welding, it says the integral body structure is corroded, but structural rigidity is not significantly reduced. So that's good. So yeah, so it worked out in the end. So £250 for the car, £50 to have it brought to my house, a few quid spent on suspension springs and things like that. So I think about £500 I'm probably in for at the moment on this. So yeah, so I've got a car now that's got 12 months MOT. It's only done 117,000 miles. I know the suspension's all good because it's all been replaced. So yeah, good news. So I can now move on to either the Dacia Sandero that I've got sat here, which has got a knocking engine. Not sure what that was, it ran out of oil I think. And also I've got the Peugeot 207 engine, that 1.6 THP to carry on with. That was the teardown. So it means I can now get back on with those, and the Ford Focus is done. Obviously give it an oil change, but apart from that it's done. So that's great news. So anyway, so hopefully you enjoyed this series, and many thanks for watching, and have a good weekend.